What's up, y'all? Welcome to Stuck in My Thoughts. In today's episode, we're going to take a step away from our sports and culture entertainment guest. We're going to focus on Mr. Walt Woltosz. He has a bachelor's and a master's from Auburn University in aerospace engineering, and he's responsible for the technology that helps those with communication disabilities such as ALS. Mr. Woltosz is a great guest, and I hope you guys enjoy the show.
Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces. That mean you really playing with your life. I'm about to come and run it all back. I'm the new era, about to snap back. You ain't fitting for it because you all cap like.
Welcome to the Stuck in My Thoughts podcast. It's a place you want to be to hear a one-of-a-kind POV. And today's point of view comes from arguably one of the biggest guests we've ever had on. He is Mr. Walt Woltosz. Man, I appreciate you taking the time.
I'm happy to be here, Justin.
Yes, sir. So I've done a lot of research. You know, we've been planning this for a minute. It's probably been a month and a half in advance. And, you know, growing up and being born in Arkansas, what was that like back in 1945 for you?
Well, I don't remember much about it. We only lived in Arkansas for probably less than 2 years. Okay. My mother was from Arkansas. She lived in a house that was 7 miles of dirt road from the nearest paved road, had no running water, no electricity. When I was born in a hospital about 30 miles away. Mom went into false labor about a week before I was born, so they drove up to the hospital and they stayed overnight. And when they came back the next day, the house was a pile of ashes. Everything had burned to the ground. So whatever they didn't have in the car was gone. And luckily they had some things in other places. But Dad and my grandfather and neighbors, and my grandfather was a Church of Christ preacher and a doctor. He and my grandmother delivered about 1,500 babies in that northwest corner of Arkansas and surrounding areas over about 30 years. So he was a missionary basically out of a church in Ohio. And they all got together and they built a house, and that was a house that we'd go visit every summer as soon as school got out. I really grew up mostly in Rochester, New York. We lived in Lawrence, Massachusetts after we left Arkansas for a little bit of time, and then Utica and Schenectady, and then Rochester, New York is where I finished high school. As soon as I finished high school at 17, I knew I had to get out of the house because I was so much smarter than my parents were. I mean, I was 17. I knew everything, right?
Yeah, that's the way all 17-year-olds think.
Well, Dad had been in the Navy. He went in 1940, of course, didn't get out till 45. And I came home with enlistment papers for the Air Force. I said, Dad, you know, the Air Force has this college program. They'll pay for my college. I'll have to earn 2 years to start, but then they'll send me to college. But I need you to sign these enlistment papers. And he said, oh, really? He said, go get me a pen. So he signed me up. He says, they'll grow you up. And, of course, they do.
How do you feel like that military background kind of shaped you into who you are?
Well, you know, I originally wanted to have a military career. And I did get stationed out in Oklahoma on a Strategic Air Command base. Got to fly on B-52s about 400 hours, not as a pilot, but as a passenger. I was an in-flight technician on a missile guidance system that the B-52 carried called the Hound Dog. And I finally got accepted into the Airman Education and Commissioning Program, and they said, where would you like to go to school? And I said, oh, I have a choice. I said, well, maybe, you know, it depends. And I said, can I go to Auburn? And they said, absolutely, great engineering school. What do you know about Auburn? I said, well, Frank Shanka from my squadron in Oklahoma went there last year in the same program. At least I'll know somebody there. So you ever been to Auburn? I said, I've never been in the state of Alabama. So serendipity, you know, to end up here, just one of those accidental things that happens that changes your whole life's trajectory. And, you know, just really fortunate that I ended up here because I obviously love the place, you know. And then my wife, Ginger, who's my second wife for 43 years now, has become an Auburn orange and blue bleeder.
Yeah.
You know? She's definitely all in for Auburn. And so she was a California girl. She went to San Jose State. When we played San Jose State twice, she was rooting for Auburn.
That's what's up right there. And when I got a chance to meet you, this was back homecoming weekend here at Auburn, and getting a chance to hear your story immediately, I was like, hey, I've got to get him on the podcast, got to sit down with him. And knowing some of the the impactful things that you've been able to do throughout your career. I want to go back a little bit because this was the thing that stuck with me the most. How did an effort to help out your mother-in-law turn into the phenomenon of the technology that people that have diseases and communication such as ALS that they use today? How'd that come about?
Well, I was a rocket motor engineer. I did my bachelor's and master's in aerospace engineering here at Auburn. Did another master's up at UAH. I was working at UAH, working in Huntsville rather, for Thiokol, a rocket motor company. They sent me out to California on a business trip in 1976. I was doing some very new things with computers, just getting strong enough then to do some numerical optimization and so on. And so I started applying that to designing rocket motors. I'd learned about it on the space shuttle program, where I accidentally discovered that if you roll the space shuttle upside down, you pick up about 8,000 pounds of free payload. It's just aerodynamically more efficient. So I go out to California, and I was working for United Technologies, and Ginger's mother had ALS in 1980. At that time, personal computers were rare. Nobody owned a computer back then. But actually, Ginger came up with the idea. She said her mother had reached the point where she couldn't speak, she couldn't write. And she said, do you think we could use one of these personal computers to make a communication system for my mom? And I thought, I don't know anything about that. I'm a rocket motor engineer, And so I said, I'll think about it. Well, I was working literally 80 hours a week, sometimes 100, very, very busy. I was managing a group of about 30 people, developing software and writing proposals for government contracts on different kinds of rocket motors. And so a couple weeks later, she asked, did you have a chance to think about that? And I said, I really haven't, but I will. So I started thinking about it, and then we started going around and seeing if we could find a computer store. This was in the Silicon Valley of California, Sunnyvale, California. And it was so rare to find a computer store back then. Finally ended up, long and the short, with a Radio Shack TRS-80 Model 1 with 16K of RAM. That's K, not megabytes, not gigabytes. I mean, that was the technology. So I bought one and started working on how do you get someone to communicate when all they can do is barely make a motion. Mm-hmm. All they can do is bump a switch. So that started it, and long and the short is we started a company. Just a little bit of the soap opera aspect of it. Ginger was my secretary at that time. Yeah. But that threw us together a lot.
Who made the first move on that one?
Well, it was one of these things where we kept trying to, after work, we'd go look for computer stores. And then once I bought the computer, we would go up to her parents' house up in Daly City, California, up towards San Francisco, and try things with her mom to see if I could find some way that she would be able to select words or letters, either be able to spell words or select words. And there were too many problems that I didn't quite understand yet, how limited she was with her vision. She could see the computer screen with one set of glasses, but she needed a different set of glasses to see the words, which were on large posters on 4 easels that we had, 2 on each side. Oops, I'm sorry. Two on each side of her bed with large type, and each word had a number, a 3-digit number. And so on the screen, you'd see what looked like an odometer. So it would go 0, 1, 2, 3, and you control the speed. You hit your switch, it puts that number up and moves over. You hit the second number, hit the third number, and then it would say the word. It wouldn't say, it would just show on the screen the word or the phrase that went with that number. So it might be, my nose itches. That could be a whole phrase, and it was number 134. So she'd have to select 1, 3, 4, and it would put that up there. Very crude, very crude. She only lasted a matter of months after we started that. But again, it threw Ginger and me together, and what can I say? We fell in love 43 years later, still very much in love. I mean, she's my angel. She's my angel. We get along great with our exes. Well, with my ex. Her ex is out of the picture. But like we did Thanksgiving and Christmas at my ex's house out in California.
Man, that takes maturity.
Everybody gets, it took a little while for the dust to settle. But yeah, it was it was inevitable, and all the kids, our 5 kids, agree it was the right thing to do. As hard as it was gut wrenching to go through the divorce. But it's worked out quite well in the long run. So a little soap opera there.
Yeah, a lot of people in today's society, number one, not many people are getting married. Not many people stay married. Just from your experience in that, field of life, I feel like everybody is watching the show can take some tidbits. What advice would you give to those people right now that are getting into marriages, or people that want to pursue that?
Don't get married at 19. You're too young. I was 19. She was 21. She was a little older. But, you're not grown up enough at 19 to make a lifetime commitment. We were married 16 years. We had 5 kids, and thank God we had them all. And we got 9 grandkids now. February 1st, here in a few weeks, would have been our 60th anniversary. But again, we split, and then Ginger and I now have had 43 years together. So, and still going strong. As far as the company doing the computers for the disabled, after her mom died, I just was using the computer to kind of do some programming for rocket motors. I had my own computer at home now, so I could play with some pretty small programs with only 16K of memory. But then there was an article in the San Jose Mercury News, Sunday section, parade section they called it, front page, how do you live with a broken man? And it showed this gal pushing a wheelchair with her husband in the chair. And I read the story about it, and turns out he, Stan was his name, he had been a photographic engineer, and he had actually gone to the Rochester Institute of Technology. And I mentioned I grew up in Rochester. And he was a big baseball fan. His boys were in Little League. He was an umpire for a Little League game, and someone got mad at one of the calls that he made and threw a baseball and hit him right in the temple. He ended up having a stroke. He ended up almost quadriplegic. He could move one arm a little bit, couldn't speak, and so I called, I got a contact and called the gal, and I said, I don't know if I can help, but I worked on the system for my wife's mother, and maybe we can do something. So she said, please, we'd love to see if you could do something. And that led to changing the strategies. I came up with word prediction and some other things that nobody had done before, trying to make it go faster, and that led to a company that we started, we had for 30 years. We sold it in 2011. It's now owned by another Auburn engineer, Galen Ponder, who is up north of Birmingham. Terrific guy, and he's still helping people with the technology. We didn't grow to the extent that some of the other companies with big money behind it. We never had any big financing. It was all bootstrapped, our own. A little bit of a loan from our parents, which we paid back with interest, but never had any big financing. About 15 years into that company, we started Simulations Plus to do software for drug research. So in my aerospace career, I did a lot of simulation and modeling software. And now I'd been in healthcare for 15 years doing what we call Words Plus was the name of our first company. But I wanted to get back into simulation and modeling, and 2 of our kids worked for Syntex, a drug company out in Palo Alto. And so we ended up starting that company. We took it public. It's on the NASDAQ today. In fact, tomorrow's our next earnings release, our quarterly earnings release. So we've been public now for almost 28 years, been continuously profitable for probably 15 years, never had a losing quarter through all the ups and downs of 2008 and all the other market conditions. We just keep making steady progress, making money, and growing the company.
Is that SLP on the ticker?
SLP is the ticker, yeah.
Looked up, I'm trying to get into that investment in the stocks, so I've seen it on there.
Well, my lawyer told me when we first started the company, don't ever tell anybody to buy or sell your stock, ever, no matter what. So I've stayed away from that.
Yes, sir.
Says all that'll do is get you into trouble because you don't know what'll happen tomorrow.
When you're making these technologies, I'm assuming, you're not hitting it on the first try. And you go through the highs and lows. I remember we were talking when I first met you. You told me you were up late at night trying to figure this out, trying to help your mother-in-law, trying to help the guy who got hit and lost a lot of his abilities. What were your thoughts when the technology finally worked for you? Well,
the time that it finally really did work was with a football coach in Los Gatos, California, Charlie Wiedemeyer. He and his wife Lucy were actually the subjects of a made-for-TV movie. And I think, if I remember right, Michael Learned, which is a woman, played Lucy, and I can't remember the name of the actor that played Charlie, but Charlie was an All-American football player. He was out of Hawaii, went to Michigan State or Michigan, I think Michigan State, and became a football coach. Well, he developed ALS, and he started out with the extremities. Now, Ginger's mother started out in what's called the bulbar region, in your throat, and generally people who start there with ALS don't last as long. Charlie started with a foot drop, like Stephen Hawking did. Hawking, again, used one of our systems for most of his life, from 1985 till the end. But he started with the extremities, and he and Charlie were the longest living ALS patients that we dealt with, both of them decades, which is quite rare. But I found out about Charlie and went down to his house. He was right there in the Bay Area where we were. And I ended up writing some, we had graduated now to a TRS-80 Model 3, so we had 64K of RAM instead of 16. We were cooking.
Moving on up there.
Yeah. I'll say. And we had a floppy disk drive.
Okay, look at him.
Instead of a cassette tape recorder to store the program. But I wrote him a program that he could diagram football plays just by a foot switch. So he could have, left slash, right slash, greater than, less than, X's and O's, and so he could diagram very, very slowly, scanning down and across and picking the character that he wanted to place in that location, and then scanning down and across and hitting a switch each time to make selections. But he could diagram football plays. And then they would take him out to the games in a golf cart. So Lucy would drive the golf cart. He had 2 teenage kids, great kids. Gosh, they're probably in their 50s now.
Yeah.
I'd love to see how they've done, because they're great kids that would help out. And then he lost the ability to murmur. He was able to murmur just enough that his wife and his coaches and his kids could understand him. He lost that, and then we had to put him on a voice synthesizer so that he could speak through the voice synthesizer. But he went on for a long, long time, decades.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Stephen Hawking earlier. How does that relationship even start? And then what was he like? Because I hear about Stephen Hawking, you heard about him for a long time, but not many people get to actually interact with him and be in that space with him.
Yeah. And it's Hawking.
Hawking, yeah.
Hawking. Which is, I guess, when you go out and you hunt with a hawk, a trained hawk or something, back in England. Well, I got a call from a guy who was a physicist. I think his name was Martin King. He was up in the Northwest, like Minnesota, Wisconsin, somewhere in there. And he said, I understand that you've got a system for ALS patients, and he says, I've got someone that I know, a fellow physicist. He's in England, and he has ALS and so on, and he can't speak, can't write. And he says, I've got a system that I tried to work with him, but it wasn't working. So we'd like to see if your system might work. I said, are you talking about Stephen Hawking? And he said, well, I can't say, it's confidential. I said, if it's Stephen Hawking, I'll send him whatever he needs, free. And so he says, I'll get back to you. And this was before email, this was faxes and phone calls and long-distance phone calls. We used to have to pay extra for long distance. And so he got back to me a day or two later. He said, okay, it's Stephen Hawking. I said, give me an address. So he had been able to sort of murmur, and then he ended up having to have a tracheostomy tube put in, and then he couldn't do that anymore. So he needed a way to communicate. And so he was still in the ICU. And he had a very narrow escape with death there. That was a really rough time for him, but he recovered and went on for decades. He didn't have much room to put a computer, and the TRS-80 Model 3 is this big box about like that. Mm-hmm. But we had a little Apple IIc that was a little flat thing with a small monitor. And I had started programming for that, and I said, well, let's work on that to start with, because it'll fit where he is. We sent it over. British Customs held it up for 3 weeks because they couldn't believe it was free. They wanted to collect a tariff on it.
Yeah.
And by that time, he had gotten out and gone home. We said, all right, well, we can go to the IBM PC Junior, which had just come out, and that had 128K. keep going up.
Moving on up.
Yep.
Story gets better, y'all.
Yep. And so that's what he ended up starting on. And we had advanced the software considerably by then. This was about 1985, and we had started in 1980 with Ginger's mom. So 5 years of development, a couple of that part-time, and then finally in 83, I quit my aerospace job and went full-time. Ended up, my total salary the first 5 years was zero. We paid Ginger a nominal salary. We managed to scrape by and keep going, but again, never had any financing, just bootstrapped. And if you work about 80 to 100 hours a week, you get the same amount of work done as 3 or 4 other people that you don't have to pay, right? So that's how we grew, and just kept growing and growing, and then, like I say, about 1996, 15 years after we incorporated, we started Simulations Plus, and I did get an NSF grant there to develop software to let disabled students run simulated lab experiments on the computer just by hitting a switch. And we won some awards with that right out of the box, but schools didn't want to spend the money for it. It was very expensive to develop, and so we ended up having to drop that product line and focus on the pharmaceutical science, which has worked out well.
You talked about when you were 17, you knew everything at that point in time. Yeah. Did you always imagine that this is how your life would have turned out?
Oh, no way. No way. I gave the commencement speech here a couple of years ago, and I pointed out your life's trajectory is going to go in directions you can't possibly foresee. And sometimes a change in direction will be a decision that you made. Sometimes it'll be a decision that someone else made that you didn't agree with, but it turned out to be a good thing for you. And I can't tell you how many different times that has happened. I mean, I've gone through a number of careers. I mean, Air Force was a career for a few years, then aerospace, and then, well, even before aerospace, when I finished my master's degree, I had an NSF fellowship to do a PhD, but nobody was hiring aerospace engineers in 1970. And I had a wife and 2 kids already. And I said, I got to get a job. So I fell back on my electronics experience. I'd been in ham radio since I was 12. My dad was a double E, and so he got me very interested in electronics. And I ended up working for the FAA as a field engineer in the Southeast region, installing navigation aids for aircraft for about a year. And then Stephen was ready to start kindergarten, and luckily aerospace opened up, and that's when I got on the space shuttle ascent trajectory optimization program, simulating how to fly the shuttle to orbit. So when I interviewed with Northrop that time, they had 2 jobs, one in aerodynamics, which was one of my specialties in graduate school, aerodynamics and propulsion, and one in trajectory optimization. I thought, well, I don't know anything about that, so they're not going to give me that job.
Yeah.
Of course they did. And then I learned about optimization and what you could do with it, and I thought, all right, this is pretty cool stuff. We could optimize designs of rocket motors with this, and went down that road for about a dozen years, working for Thiokol and the Air Force and United Technologies, and United Technologies is where Ginger and I met. And so decisions that were made along the way that you'd never, ever guess. I mean, if Ginger hadn't walked into my office and said, do you think we could make a communication system for my mom with one of these new personal computers, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. Yeah. My life would have gone in a whole different direction.
So she's the mastermind.
She was the one that came up with the idea. I didn't. I just implemented it, but she was the instigator. And,
you mentioned now in the first 5 years, you're at $0. Like, you're funding this thing. You use the term bootstrapping it all the way, and now we're in New Year 2025, and just from the advice perspective, from somebody who has been where, hey, I'm not making no money, and now I'm in 2025, and I am financially secure for life and generational wealth type of deal. Does money make you happy, and can money change people?
I don't think you change. It's like, they say the leopard can't lose its spots or change its spots. To me, money's a tool. We sponsor a very large number of scholarships and fellowships here at Auburn and professorships. And when I think of when I went through school here, it was $150 a quarter. That didn't cover the cost of my education. Somebody else helped out. I will never know who they are. I can never thank them. They're probably not even alive anymore. But I can pay it forward. you know. And, we have a very large number of need-based scholarships, and to me, those are the ones that I'm really passionate about. We have 10 scholarships out in aviation management called the Bessie Coleman Scholarships. Bessie Coleman was the first American to have an international pilot's license in 1921. She was a black woman. Most people don't know who Bessie Coleman was. My younger son, who has a degree in film production, and I have written a script for her life that we worked on for years and years. And we started in about 2012, so 13 years. We worked on it for about 5 years. Couldn't get it sold. It's a very expensive production, but it's an epic story. It'll be like Hidden Figures or The Help or 12 Years a Slave or some of the other really great movies that have come out. It's truly an epic story, what she had to overcome to become a pilot and be able to fly in the United States. She had to go to France to learn how to fly because no one in the United States would even let her sit in the airplane. First, she was a woman. Second, she was black. She wasn't wealthy at all. She was a manicurist in Chicago. But she had a friend who was a publisher of the Chicago Defender, which is a black newspaper, still around today after over 100 years. And he helped her raise money through the business community and send her to France. And she got on a ship all by herself at 23 years old or something like that and went across the Atlantic. That's a pretty ambitious thing to do.
Pretty big. History lessons. I didn't even know about that. I have to
so we have 10 scholarships, all need-based. In that area, we've got 50 or so PhD fellowships in engineering, along with quite a number of university-wide need-based scholarships. We contribute to the Melton Scholarships, which you may be familiar with, the Harold Melton Scholarships. It was originally called Together We Will. It was something Bruce Pearl started. And so, to me, if someone's got the aptitude and the attitude to be successful at Auburn, but just doesn't have the money, it'd be a shame for them to not be able to get that piece of paper that says they could graduate from Auburn, because that's not just going to change their life. That's going to go to their progeny, their kids, their grandkids. That'll fan out over the years. So you talk about the use of money. That's something that I find very satisfying. Ginger and I both do. We give to a lot of charities. I also have my own airplane, though. We've got a very nice house in Auburn. I mentioned the renovations we're doing. So we support students at Auburn that are not just our grandkids, but kids of friends, and they're all out of state. So ka-ching.
Yeah.
But we can afford it.
Yeah.
And we love doing it. To give kids the opportunity to come here, get the education that's really going to change their life. That's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that's big time. Impact is the word I like to use for that. Yeah. And you mentioned success while you were speaking. Everybody has their own definition of success, whether it's fulfillment, whether it's money, as we mentioned, or a numerous amount of things. How would you define what success is?
Wow. I wish I'd known you were going to ask me that. I hope I had more time to think about it.
Sometimes I like to put them on the spot.
It's not just money. Working in aerospace, the thing that made me the happiest was doing something new and innovative that hadn't been done before. So applying optimization, designing rocket motors that could do things that nobody thought you could do, achieving the performance through optimization. That was very satisfying. And then being able to help people. I mean, aerospace, okay, you're building things that either destroy targets. We always say civil engineers build targets, we bomb them. Aerospace engineers. Or put things up in space, satellites and things like that. But then getting into the healthcare industry with Words Plus, the computers for the disabled, then we would go around and visit people. We got our first airplane in early 80s, and we would fly around the country to see patients, hauling our big TRS-80 Model 3 in the back of the airplane with a microwave oven cart that we put it on, and a little dot matrix printer and a voice synthesizer box. I mean, it was a production to haul that. Now it all fits in a laptop, but back then it was like 50, 60 pounds of stuff. But we would visit families, and, the impact that you had when you could see someone just within minutes recognize that they could do this and see the smile on their face and their families. And I got to admit, we met a few people. I still remember one husband that really wanted to punch his lights out. He said, "Why don't you just die?" It was his wife who had ALS, and he was not the kind of person that you'd want to have as a husband if you had ALS. But that was rare. Most of the families really rallied around the person who had ALS or whatever other condition it might have been. We dealt with a lot of kids who had cerebral palsy or spina bifida or other conditions that rendered them either paralyzed, partially paralyzed, unable to speak. Autistic kids, real challenge. They might have been motorically fine, but behaviorally, it was a problem. And a lot of that was because they couldn't communicate well. So it reminds me of a 1.5-year-old. I've got a granddaughter who's 1.5. She's starting to talk, but she can't really communicate a lot yet. And so what do you do at that age? You throw a tantrum or you cry or whatever.
Had terrible twos there.
Yeah. And so you give these kids, typically kids who are autistic, a way of communicating, and it changes them. They suddenly now, they can tell you what they're unhappy about or what they want to do. And they don't throw the tantrums. They don't get violent. So, it's a lot of satisfaction comes from being able to help that way. And then in the pharmaceutical industry, what we do saves a tremendous amount of time and money in drug development. And everybody complains about the cost of drugs, but most people have no idea how difficult it is to bring a drug to market. The actual cost, if you cover all the costs that a company has to pay over decades and divide it by the number of approved drugs that they get, it runs anywhere from $4 to $12 billion just to get that on the market. And most drugs that go to market will never recover their own development costs, much less all the failures it took to get to them. Because you go through thousands and thousands of failures before you find that needle in a haystack that's going to eventually get approved. So anything we can do to cut down on the losers. When that drug fails in phase 4, it was a bad drug the first day the chemist drew it 15 years ago on a computer or on a napkin or whatever, as they say. So we're helping that way. So these last two businesses are helping people, and that's very satisfying.
You're helping me segue into all of my next points. You just mentioned failure. That was another point on the rundown. I always say that the failures make the successes, and you're not going to have anything worthwhile if you don't fail a couple of times. What has failure taught you as you've gone throughout your career and out your life?
There's a saying by Calvin Coolidge about persistence, and you have to look it up. I used to have it on my door, to my office, but persistence is what wins. It's not education. Education is important. It's not genius. That's nice to have. It's really sticking to it and doing it. Now, I had my business failures. When I was in Huntsville, we started a company, a small company, two other guys and I. We split off from the company we'd been working for, started writing proposals to NASA, responding to their requests for bids on different contracts. Never did win one. Second mortgaged our houses and went into debt. We had no income. So we were all self-financed. We finally said, can't do it. And that's when I ended up interviewing with Thiokol. I tried to sell them some work, and they said, well, can't give you a contract, but we can give you a job. So I went with them, and that got me into optimizing rocket motors. And then we started another company to do aerial mapping of the state of Alabama. This was in 1974 or 5, right? So Alabama wanted to have someone fly an airplane with cameras to just take pictures, almost like Google Earth. You're going to take pictures of everything in Alabama so they can categorize it and make sure they're collecting taxes and all that, know who owns what and all that. We tried to bid on that. We weren't successful. I got to be careful what I say, but if you're not in the old boys club, you may not get the contract. Right? Yeah. In some cases. I mean, they didn't know who we were. We were, a bunch of aerospace engineers and psychologists and so on. and they had people that they already knew had the expertise. And I was a pilot; I could fly the airplane, and we could always get a camera and all that and take pictures. But that wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So I had my failures. Words Plus, I mean, we came close a few times. Like I say, that first 5 years, my salary was zero. It's like I could go back to aerospace, and even then, in 1980, I was making about $60,000 a year, which was really good money back then. And so, should we keep doing this or not? And then, you'd go visit a family, either flying there or driving there, and come home and think, we really helped them. It's really going to be a good thing to do. We got to keep doing this.
Yeah.
So we stuck with it. We persisted.
Worked out.
It did.
Worked out in the long run, and you were a good mentor to a lot of people out in this world, and especially the students on campus. And I'm sure that there have been people who've been instrumental in your life as well. And you've given these young people advice. What's some of the best advice you've been given?
Wow. My best educator was Richard Sforzini. He was a professor in aerospace engineering here at Auburn. He was my major professor for my master's. He was heartbroken when I told him I wasn't going to accept the NSF fellowship to do a PhD, because there goes 3 or 4 years of slave labor. But he was a great educator. It turns out he was from Rochester. He and his wife were both from Rochester, which is very coincidental that we met up here. They're both gone now. But he told me when I decided I wasn't going to do the PhD, he says, whatever you go into, you're probably not going to be doing it after a certain number of years. I said, what do you mean? I'm spending all this time to get this education to learn how to be a rocket motor engineer or an aerodynamicist. You're telling me I'm not going to do that? And I thought, that's nuts. But he was right. Careers changed several times. My dad, like me, was a workaholic. Work first, play later. That was one of his sayings. Work first, play later. Get your work done. Get your homework done before you go out to play, and things like that. And I became, I have to admit, a workaholic. I spent way more hours doing what I did, whether I was in aerospace or in Words Plus or Simulations Plus. Truthfully, probably not paying enough attention to my family, my kids. I coached some soccer and some t-ball and stuff like that, and Indian guides, but could have spent more time, I think, with the kids. Everybody gets along fine now, but, and we're able to help them a lot now because of the financial rewards that we've reaped. But yeah, I'd have a hard time picking someone besides Dick Sforzini, Richard Sforzini, as a true mentor, or my dad. Those two had a great influence on me.
Your father said, work now, play later. I think it's later. It's time to enjoy everything. And one of the coolest things that I thought from our first interaction was you telling me about, driving those cars and flying down over there on the racetrack. Can you give some people the insight of what you do? You said Tesla is like the best car out there. So how do you get involved in that type of stuff? Well,
I raced, there was a class called Pro 7 class. It was the early generation RX-7s. I raced those in the Sports Car Club of America out in California for a number of years and had a lot of fun. We'd have 40 cars in a field, and if you weren't up front, you were swapping paint at turn one with somebody. You'd rub a little bit and get black tire marks on your car and stuff. But I really enjoyed racing. I'm a speed freak. I grew up in the 60s with, the muscle cars, original muscle cars in the 60s, the Corvettes and the Dodge Ram Chargers and cars like that. Did some drag racing back when I was in the Air Force and had a lot of fun. So, like I say, I'm kind of a speed and power freak. Tesla came out with the model called the Plaid, which is, it's a 3-motor electric car. It's a 4-door, 5-passenger sedan that'll do 0 to 60 in just under 2 seconds. It's like being run in the back. It's like an 18-wheeler just hit you in the back. If you don't have your head against the headrest, it's going to bounce off.
Oh, man. That's
it's wild. But it drives like a regular car. And so if you don't get crazy with it, it doesn't get crazy. Well, one of the professors here, Dave Beverly, works with the autonomous IndyCar team. And so we got close to him. We helped sponsor the car. And one day they had a little event out at the NCAT track, the National Center for Asphalt Technology track that Auburn owns. And it's about I don't think it's quite a 2-mile oval track. And about every 100 feet or so is a different state's formulation for asphalt. And so they run these heavily laden 18-wheelers around the track 24/7, I think 5 days a week, with testing the asphalt to see if the formulation is going to hold up with super heavy weights going over and over and over again. But on the weekends, nobody's on the track. So we were out there, and Professor Beverly says, "Want to take the Tesla on the track?" He said, "Let's go." So we took it out there. It went around. I don't know if that was an insurance issue. Maybe I shouldn't even be talking about this.
It's all good.
But yeah, we got it up to, I think, 152. But the straight on the track is not that long, so it gets up there really fast. But then you got a curve coming up, so you got to slow down again. But we had some good times there.
I'm assuming your wife is not in the car when you're hitting that 0 to 60.
She was at least one
Okay.
ride, and a few other people who I won't mention names.
Yeah. She's ride or die. Hey, she's in there.
Sanford Hall over there. Yeah. But yeah, we had a good time.
That's what's up. Well, Ms. Woltosz, I appreciate you sitting down with me, but I'm curious to know if you could sit down with 3 people for a dinner. They could be dead or alive. Who would those 3 people be?
Oh, wow. Well, I've had dinner with Stephen Hawking numerous times, so I've already had that experience. Donald Trump.
Okay.
He's a bit of an enigma. I love what he does. I don't necessarily love how he does it sometimes, the way he presents himself, although he's toned down a lot from his first round. But I'd probably like to play a round of golf with him. He'd whoop my butt because I'm not that good of a golfer, and I guess he is. But just to talk with him and get his perspective. I mean, he grew up in New York State. I grew up in New York State in a very different kind of environment. I was definitely middle class, maybe slightly lower middle class. But we had a nice neighborhood. He grew up, in extreme wealth. I'm now what's considered wealthy, nowhere near in his league, but we're very financially independent. I would just like to talk to him about what does he think about money and life in general. I mean, I believe he has a service mentality, which I do. Helping people is something I really enjoy doing. I think he's got a big ego, and I probably have to admit I probably have not as big as his. Probably I don't think anybody has as big an ego as he has, but it'd be fun to beat him. Dead or alive? That's a tough one. I tend to be science-oriented and inventor-oriented. I have to admit, I'm not a religious person now. I have been extremely religious. But if I could meet Jesus, just to confirm or deny how I feel that he lived his life, and because his was a life of service as well, I think he'd be. Look at what he did to the world. Whether you believe in him being supernatural or not, he had a tremendous impact on the world, and so that would be one to meet. A third one, wow. Bessie Coleman. That woman was amazing. She was brave, she was smart, she was charming, which she used to her advantage a lot. But, what she accomplished against all the odds, against racism, sexism, poverty, what she accomplished was phenomenal, and a fellow pilot. I love doing aerobatics. I haven't done them in a few years, but I love doing aerobatics. I wouldn't do them with the kind of airplane she had, sticks and wire and canvas, and the engines would fail after about 50 hours. She had a lot of guts. They called her Brave Bessie and Queen Bessie. She had Queen Bess, different names for her, but she was an extremely brave woman. And talk about persistence. Go back to the persistence. she persisted against all odds and became one of the best aerobatic pilots in the country. She'd go around putting on air shows. And she would hold her ground. She'd say, my folks and the white folks are going to come through the same entrance. She said, you can sit them in different areas in the bleachers, but they come through the same entrance or I don't do the show. So she stood her ground, and that took guts back then. I mean, there were lynchings back then. Even in Chicago, there were lynchings. She was there for the Chicago riots in I think it was right after World War I, 1918, 19, somewhere in there. She was in there during that era when there were about 40 people killed. And all simply because a young black boy on an inner tube floated into a white beach area on I guess, Lake Michigan. And they ended up, I don't know if they killed him, stoned him, or what happened, but it started the riots. And thank goodness we don't have that environment today. There's pockets of it, I guess, still, that, I don't know, maybe you can never get rid of all that, but thank goodness it's a very different world today than it was then. But I would really enjoy meeting her. That would be something.
Some three impactful people right there. And lastly, the name of the show is called Stuck in My Thoughts, and I ask every guest that comes on, just imagine yourself, you've done all the work, you're chilling for the rest of the day. What is it that Mr. Walt Woltosz gets stuck in his thoughts about?
What do I get stuck in my thoughts about?
Yes, sir.
Wow. I'm involved in so many things. That's a hard one to answer. I'm still, I guess, a workaholic. Being retired, being on the board of trustees, it takes time. Engineering, Alumni Engineering Council. Was very involved with On to Victory. Was one of the founding members of the board of On to Victory for the NIL program and major donor to that. So my thoughts, they're going all over the place. Wow, I don't know that I could pick a single topic because I'm multitasking all the time.
Yeah,
it's just my
nature. He's stuck in his thoughts about everything.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
Just about.
Well, Mr. Woltosz, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today and sharing your story, giving some good insight and good advice. And all you guys that are watching this, make sure you go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, continue to support us, continue to follow Mr. Woltosz and all of his great contributions. I just thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My pleasure, Justin. Thank you very much.
Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah.